question that began to get asked of me. And I just remember in those early days that when they'd ask me about Cuba, about Castro, and what was important to me is that my parents, like most of yours, came to the United States and sacrificed everything so we could be free, that we could pursue our dreams and speak our mind without any fear of repression, persecution, or sometimes there is repercussion for speaking your mind. But the important thing is that you can. And this is a country where you can do that. You can criticize the president on a daily basis and you won't get put in jail, contrary to what happens, as we know in Cuba, that you can't even wink in the wrong direction because someone will visit you the next day at your house. And so I began to very simply speak what I felt or what I knew. And this sometimes was not a very popular opinion. And over the years, now 30 years since then, or 27 or whatever it's been since the Untouchables, more and more people wanted to ask me about that question. Again, to the detriment of some of the producers who wanted me to talk about the movies, and I said, well, you know, you either have to tell them not to ask me, but I'm not going to not answer it. I'm not going to bring up the subject, but if they ask me the question, I'm going to answer it. And because of that, I've noticed over the years that I've created, I guess, some fans, but I've also created a lot of enemies. And those enemies I've noticed when they have an opportunity or an agenda to try to discredit something you do, or something you said, or especially in regards to the Cuban issue, they take it upon themselves to exercise that agenda. And I saw that come to light a lot with The Lost City, which is a movie that I look at it as a historical drama. And the only agenda that I had with the movie was to tell the truth and to make a great movie. I showed it at Harvard, and a lot of the professors there which I consider a very open-minded, liberal, free-thinking school, really expressed really celebrated the movie and the fact that it's so well balanced, and that they were expecting something more, I would say, inflammatory, or from the point of view of maybe a radical Cuban exile. But they were so surprised, and I said, no, but it has to be balanced, because the truth, there's only one truth, there's no two truths. But yet, there's people out there that I saw in the process of the movie being seen, that they wanted to discredit that truth, because it doesn't serve the purpose of their glorification of a situation that has no glory. So, what do you do with that as a citizen? I mean, do you say to yourself, maybe I shouldn't say that because it might hurt, my career, or it might hurt my family, or it might hurt. But ultimately, going back to my tea, what do? You have to, when we're presented a problem or presented a question, you have to speak the truth. Because if we're going to rectify or educate the world with the realities of what's going on in our country, you have to speak the truth. And that's basically what I've tried to do all my life, not only in my work, which is the essence of anything that has any kind of resonance in an actor's work, is to be truthful and organic to the reality of the situation, and to personalize the work in a way that people can relate to that truth. So Cuba to me is something that I live with on a daily basis in my life. My wife is Cuban, my children are Cuban Americans, and really I've been dedicated to, in a way, my own personal projects have always revolved around a Cuban theme, even to the dismay of my agents. Not another Cuban story, And I said, hey, Martin Scorsese makes a lot of movies about Italians, why can't I make it about Cubans, What's the difference? What is the difference between The Lost City and Schindler's List? Why isn't The Lost City perceived to be as accessible from a marketing standpoint as Schindler's List? I'm not comparing, I'm not saying it's a better movie or anything, just from the sense of of the story. You know, the English patient. I'm not English for a patient, but I want to see it, you know? You know, these are historical dramas. Why is a movie like The Lost City perceived to be a marginalized subject matter, and a movie like that not, you know? So these are things, the struggles and battles that we all, you know, come across in life, sometimes smaller, sometimes bigger, but it's important to fight that battle. And the most important thing for me for that story was to actually tell the story, because movies have a very long life, and they find their way. You know, if they're not distributed widely initially, they'll go to cable, they'll go to, you know, DVD, and people get to see the movie. I've had an interesting experience with The Lost City, because it's a movie that continues to be fresh, and people are still discovering it, you know, 4 or 5 years later. Saying, what happened? You know, I just saw that movie, it was the best. You know, they give you all this whole feedback, and then you realize they've just gotten to the movie now. And so it's important. It was important for me and Carolina Infante to tell that story. It took us 16 years to find backing for it, and because it was a piece of history that really will disappear. Because in Cuba, they don't even teach that history. That part of Cuban history has been rewritten. I'm sure there's people here who have been born there and grew up in that system and could share that. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit, but they reconceive or sort of rewrite what went down prior to 1959 for their own benefit. So there was a desire. Obviously, we know there was a desire for a revolution in Cuba and there was a great embarrassment and desperation to restore the Constitution and the democracy and in a sense get rid of Florencio Batista, but we forget that manifesto, that promise of the restoration of the Constitution and the democracy, was never fulfilled. So in reality, the Cuban Revolution has still never been executed. And after 50 years of that control, what do you do when someone has betrayed a country to that extent? All you can do is remind people that he has betrayed the dream of the democratic and free Cuba. And we have to constantly remind people of that, because that regime has wanted always to rewrite the history of Cuba with very simple things. I remember when we were doing a lot of the press for The Lost City, you know, some people would say, well, you didn't show, you know, the peasants. I said, well, no, it wasn't a peasant revolution. It was an intellectual revolution. It wasn't a Bolshevik revolution. The economy in Cuba in 1959 was the 3rd largest per capita in this hemisphere. There were issues of corruption. There was a lot of embarrassment and desperation with the government, but it wasn't an economic revolution. So these are things that I think, you know, there is an educational process that has to go on for people to understand what really happened. And I thought the movie tried to address those issues to the degree that a movie can address in 2 hours. But the struggle continues. I've been fortunate that I'm, you know, still in the position to this day to talk about it when people ask me. I have another project that I'm doing on Cuba that I've written with Ernest Hemingway's niece, Hillary, about the last years of Hemingway's life in Cuba in the 1950s. It's not a political story. It's a story about the metaphor of the struggle for life and his relationship with Cuba, as he loved Cuba, and predominantly his captain of his boat, Gregorio Fuentes, and the writing of The Old Man.